Neil Prouse. I'm the project lead here at the NAC project for American Eagle Gold, and I've got Nate Smith here, who's been a very enthusiastic investor and really believed in the story. I think before a lot of eyes were on it, and Nate's done a bunch of independent work on plotting up a lot of historical data and a lot of what we've released publicly. Um, and so right now today, what we'd like to do is actually share with Nate and American Eagle investors as a whole some of the stuff that we do internally to help us vector in at a number of the different avenues of analysis we're looking at with respect to interpreting the data right now. So what we've got here is a really slick 3D file that's actually usable by anybody in a web browser. And this is being developed by Nick Dudek, who's a very talented geologist and an absolute wizard with programming. And this is kind of his brainchild. But this is a really, really elegant way of presenting 3D data to anybody without the need for proprietary software. So anybody who has a web browser can actually look at this. And so we've sent this along to Nate, and he's going to open it up, and we'll I'm sure have some questions, and we'll do our best to answer. And what we have today is actually a pretty cool little data set. So we'll let Nate go ahead here and see if it works.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, guys. I'm happy to do I'm going to call this a cold eyes review here as a first time I'm seeing it. So it'll be fun. You'll get my reaction to it. So hey, I'll just share my screen because I'll be in the model around. And yeah, it was just I mean, it took a couple of minutes to load. It's about 7 megabytes here, but as you can see on the screen now, yeah, it's just okay, what do we got here? Yeah, so it's a web page browser. It kind of looks like a core shack arrangement. But yeah, maybe you can walk me through some of the
yeah. So what we have here is a plot of downhole grade broken out into meter intervals with the color code along the side there in the legend, as well as our copper-bearing sulfide species shows. So these were generated as level plans and projected into 3D solids. And this is all based on interpolation between what we've drilled so far. So a lot of this is limited by our drilling data. But what this shows is a very, yeah, you can manipulate it.
Yeah, I'm just getting a handle of the controls here. Yeah, so it's just a right click for panning, and then
right click pans,
left click,
and left click just zooms around a fixed point in space. Yeah. And then you can zoom in and out, and then hovering over with the text highlights where you are in the hole or where you are in the grade shells.
Yeah, and then is this actual topo as well too?
Yeah, that's the surface. Yeah, that's
okay. And so just to orient ourselves here,
and all of these are toggleable. So if you click over to the side and just click on or off any of these listed features, you can actually toggle off each individual component of this plot. That just leaves the hole traces. That just leaves anything that's over 2%. And that's leaving just our chalcocite speciation shell.
Yep.
And then expanding out to bornite.
And then chalcopyrite.
And then chalcopyrite.
Ah, awesome. And so, sorry, the interpolation of this. So this is just the grade shells are being expanded. Can you talk to a little bit about that? Like, how is it producing?
Yeah,
this,
so these
interpretation of it.
So these aren't grade shells in the sense that this is where a certain cutoff would exist. These are shells, 3D shells that were drawn off of level plans that show us where we encounter our different sulfide species. And that's really important in a porphyry system because that helps us vector into the hotter part of the system where more oxidizing fluids are dumping these more copper-rich variants of copper sulfide. So chalcocite, which is just straight up copper sulfide, is about 80% copper by weight. And in a hypogene setting, that's representing our most oxidized, most oxidized hotter part of the system, with bornite forming a bit of a broader halo around that, and chalcopyrite forming an even broader halo around it. And so what this is showing from our data at this point is that we've got a single center from which these are emanating out. And it really does look like, right now at least, our interpretation is that we are on the western flank of a very large system.
Hmm.
If the north and south zone were separate centers, you would expect to see within a sulfide speciation a a somewhat symmetrical zoning emanating out from each zone. And that's not what we see. What we see is that maybe our north zone is a bit more representative of the hotter parts of the system, and mineralization in the south zone is getting a bit more distal, but still with some really, really good grade. So it's a really interesting way to view empirically gathered data and allow us to generate interpretations from that.
Yeah, no, this is great. The seeing the speciations here really localized into that northeast trending direction here,
Yeah.
and
Well,
that's in
and
line with
part
some
of
of the.
that,
Sorry.
sorry, part of that localization is simply due to the density of available data, right? We're not extrapolating too much here. We're generally just interpolating between what we've drilled.
Right. And then, okay. Well, so what took me a second there was just getting myself level set on where we're at. Would it be
Yeah,
possible, this is me just thinking out loud here, but in addition to the legend with what we can turn on and off, if in plan view, we could have just a plan view map here pasted so that we can have a bit more of a localization. Because in my mind goes to, okay, well, where's the Babine stock? And then now having, oriented myself here, it would be over to the east side of some of this, right?
right.
Yeah.
Well, and what the end game here is, once we have a better handle on the actual 3D proportions of the geology, is to put a full 3D geology model up here as well and overlay that
Oh,
with
okay.
the.
Yeah, right. So you could have your
So
litho as well to toggable.
yeah, really,
Mm-hmm.
this is just one avenue of what we are able to plot up in this.
Yeah,
Um,
this is actually, in my mind, it's taking the the standard doodle of a geo interpretation from a cross section and changing it into 3D here to see where and how to visually represent where we're seeing some of that mineralization. This isn't by any means a litho, but this is great from a speciation, so you can understand. It's like, well, are we seeing the bornite? Where are we seeing some of that chalcocite show up? And actually, I'm a little bit surprised here. Like my understanding originally when I was looking at it was largely in 4 and 12, but now to see it represented here with as well with holes 2 and 3. I mean, unless you really dug into the old previous news releases and were fine tooth combing them, you may have missed that piece of information. So this is a great capture for it. So individuals who are just starting to get up to speed on it can see, oh, okay, yeah, I heard they have some bornite, but what's this about chalcocite? And I think that'll really jump out at you.
yeah, and I mean, this is where we see them as the dominant constituents of veins and fracture hosting, right? So this isn't necessarily looking at the disseminated species. This is dominantly vein hosted because we have a lot of individual data points for each vein that we encountered in the logging.
Mhm.
Um, and so there are the odd chalcocite vein in hole one, a bit further to the south as well, down at depth. But because we just have a gap in data, when I was drawing the level plans, I wasn't fully confident in extending those. But I
Right.
can share my screen in a second here and show you what the individual points in this same format, what the individual data points actually look like in terms of where we have our sulfide species information and how we created this model.
Okay. And before we jump to that though, let's talk a little bit about this per hole arrangement that we have here. So I'm just going to turn off these guys and then turn on the holes. Will that
Yeah,
work?
so these turn on where we encounter the
Okay.
different
Yep.
grades, and this is broken out into per meter intervals.
Right. Okay. And it's breaking out copper and gold. Okay. But not
Yeah,
moly.
we don't have Molly on there. We just
Okay.
have the copper and gold, but this copper equivalent calculation is using the copper equivalent numbers that we're factoring in.
Okay, well that's important to differentiate, but I think that's really great because to date, like a lot of the news releases haven't broken out that granularity with regards to copper and gold. It's always just been in summary for copper equivalent. So I think that that's a really good piece of additional. I like the fact that it also is identifying. I'm going to point at my screen here. I'm looking away, but you can see it's getting out the where it is locally with the northings, the easting, as well as your depth. So that's a neat way to localize it as well. It's a neat representation. This is a
Yeah,
powerful little suite. Yeah, I like this
it's pretty
presentation.
cool. We
Yeah.
we extracted 3D coordinates for each meter assay interval, taking the center point along the hole, and then those hole traces are generated. Nick just created a path vector between each center point, and that shows, without any survey data, that just shows our different 3D points. So those traces are actually generated by the assay intervals, which is,
Right.
it's a pretty neat way to do it in a system that doesn't, natively take in survey information to plot that kind of stuff up.
Yeah, no, he's a bit of a wizard here. I'd love to chat with him about it. Yeah, so some of the other ideas that jump out at me, we've got the surface on there. Like I said, I would love to see maybe the surface include the beyond, just to have that overlay, the litho map, right? Just so that you can localize where am I in the system really quickly. And then having the ability to turn it on and off is nice. I also really like and appreciate the fact that it's the true surface, right? So you can actually get an idea of like, okay, well, are we on a mountainside or are we on the flats, right? And so in this case, this is that clear-cut flat area. And other future stuff I'd love to see too, of course, is as you touched on, the litho. So we can actually see, the conglomeratic matter, the actual Babine stock. And then, of course, with the recently made available IP data, it'd be nice to see if we could turn that on somehow. I don't know if that would be something we could incorporate into it, but
It's
this is a
actually
great start.
very, very
Sorry.
doable with the IP. So anything, played around with a few different ways to get these shells. One was interpolating from a voxel model,
Mhm.
which worked, but it wasn't as elegant. It was relying on software to generate that.
Yeah.
But because the IP is a continuous data set, right? When we get the inversion model, we can pull these shells out of the IP voxel models, and we could overlay that actually very, very neatly. So the IP would actually present very well on this.
Hmm. Yeah, it's like layers of a cake here. You just keep building it up.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah, and this is great to thank you for the share of this one. And I look forward to having some more time with it. Sorry, you mentioned you wanted to show something as well?
yeah. I'll quickly. Yeah. If you stop the share, I will quickly share my screen here.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think you see this big wrench-looking chalcocite prong coming up. That'll get people interested for sure. It's quite impressive. Oh, you've got hole 9 in
Yeah,
that
so
one as
this has
well.
hole
That's
nine.
great.
So with those
Hmm.
shells, because there's so much distance between hole nine and the rest of it, it was hole nine was excluded to draw the specific location of those sulfide species where we had the most confidence in the data.
Hmm.
But this is the raw data. So as part of our logging, part of the protocol is anytime we see a mineralized vein, we note its orientation and its composition and its thickness. So this plots the dominant sulfide species from each mineralized vein that we encountered in the program. There's thousands of measurements here. It's
Mm-hmm.
probably one of the more time-consuming parts of the logging process, but it's really important because this is actually really good empirical data that we can then use to draw interpretations from. Um, and so a really important part of understanding your system is understanding how those different sulfides are zoned. Um, and it just lends further, hard, good scientific data to interpretations. And what's interesting about this is this includes pyrite pyrrhotite, which are occurring as we get a little bit more distal.
Hmm.
So if we turn the chalcopyrite off, because chalcopyrite is almost ubiquitous, we turn the chalcopyrite off, you see that zoning jumps out, really, really nicely. Just ignore the pink chalcosites near surface. Those are actually typos for chlorite. So we don't actually see the chalcosite down until a little bit lower. Um, but the brown and the green for pyrite and pyrrhotite, if you look at it in plan view,
Yeah,
uh, where
you
we
can see
see
where
the
you hit it.
pyrite
Yeah.
really
Hmm.
correlates the first appearance of that pyrite and then the pyrrhotite really correlates as we get further out into that IP chargeability halo, that philic propylitic zone. Um,
Yeah, I
so
remember from previous presentations you talked to how you are now effectively using that as a shutdown rock, right? As you transition from pyrite over, but you can see where
it's
it really very much so is lining up with that outer halo.
yeah,
Hmm.
the complication of shutdown is when we see chalcopyrite, we don't want to shut down because that's a good mineral. Deep down in 16, if we turn the chalcopyrite on here, we were still getting chalcopyrite way down to the bottom, actually some pretty nice thick zones of it. Whereas in 17, or sorry, in hole 11, as we drove a bit further to the west, and hole 13, which are the other westernmost hole 16 is a little bit deeper, the
Hmm.
chalcopyrite dropped down. And that was interpreted to be pretty, good criteria for shutdown.
Right.
And
Yeah.
even in hole 5, where the grade wasn't as strong, there's still a very high frequency of narrower chalcopyrite and even in the center there, bornite bearing veinlets. So it's yeah,
Yeah, that's funny you should mention that. I've gone back and forth with a few individuals talking about hole 5 and 15, and they were making the argument, oh, that they've bookended it. This doesn't have any further to go. And I was
oh,
constantly having to point to the fact that it was, well, when you look at the IP signature where it intersected, it wasn't necessarily the ideal nearer to the we call it the bench and shoulder arrangement. It was closer into the actual porphyry stock area. So it's nice to see what you have here now, so you can differentiate the actual species that were there, as well as now with the ability to toggle between copper and gold as well shown, is going to demonstrate that it's like, no, we by no means were we bookending it. It was just not necessarily one
you
of the
know,
higher grade zones. Hmm.
well, and it's almost entirely within that chalcopyrite zone, and it actually
Hmm.
looks like the best of the bornite and the chalcocite is maybe trending up and around that intrusion to the northeast. So
Right.
there's a lot of space that remains completely untested in here. And
Yeah.
that's this is just another one avenue that we use in conjunction with the IP. And
Hmm.
eventually, when we get the full interpretation of the various different dike suites, which control a lot of the mineralization, we can have a pretty powerful vectoring tool, and a lot of the targeting will actually be based on really really good data. So that's what we're working towards. So this is how we share data internally. This has really helped us and everyone involved in the project get a really good 3D understanding of it. 3D
Hmm.
software licenses are very expensive, especially in small organizations. A lot of the suites work as, a single license is signed out per user per day.
Yeah.
This allows us to take that data and share it really easily without, and you can use this in a mobile browser. So it's pretty cool. It's a pretty powerful tool, and yeah, we're looking forward to expanding on this.
Yeah, I think this will be well received by the community of investors who are interested, and also as well as I'm sure it will probably spark some additional eyeballs on it here now, given the fact that one of the most challenging things to do in this space is to imagine things or take into account the 3D orientation of things. And I'd like to think I have a pretty good handle on it, but I mean this goes that much further to really have it jump out at you. I mean this making me smile with regards to the speciations. I remember one of the early exercises I did was with the core photos that you would release after with the assays, and then modeling those up so that I could see where the speciations was, as well as differentiating between disseminated, semi-massive, and vein.
Right.
With this now, it's like, well, there it is, and it's also in
Well,
3D, and you can quickly localize onto any of it, right?
yeah, I figured you would, of all people, would appreciate this probably
Very
the
much
most.
so.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, and I mean, you can see already, like I was mentioning some additionals I'd love to see, but then of course you've already got the other loaded up, and I can see this being something you take and add on to here very easily, right? So I look forward to seeing this also updated as we go through this upcoming season here too. Yeah.
yeah. Thankfully, we're getting Nick Dudek at our office pretty heavily involved in this, and it's great to have his skill in helping us visualize all this. So yeah, big thanks to Nick.
Yeah, it's doing some legwork here. So, can you go back to the other screen there, where of course you now have hole 9 shown as well? I think that's
Yeah,
yeah, it's kind of interesting to see where we're seeing yeah, even some of that bornite flagged earlier on as well. Yeah, I am struggling a little bit just because it's like I'm trying to orient where that babine stock is, and where that IP shoulder and the philic outer halo would be. But yeah, I
yeah.
think this is
So
a great setup for it. Sorry.
the strength of that chargeability, that actually getting that chargeability halo, the really high IP shell would be quite doable in here.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
the only thing is I mean, as you know, we're starting up an IP survey fairly soon here to expand that, and that's going to be
Yeah.
the data we really want to use. The current data set it has really great control over the center of our drilling area,
Hmm.
but we want that expanded and slightly infilled data, again, looking nice and deep to to really help complement this vector. So
Yeah, yeah, because the last video there with Charlie talking a little bit about it was more about um, canceling out the noise being introduced by the fact that that outer halo is just so, we'll call it loud or bright, or whatever we want to call it,
Very,
with
very
regards to its
bright. It's
response.
yeah,
So this will
yeah,
help. This infill will help to be able to overlay and see where and how it lays up on what we're seeing here in modeled, right?
yeah. Hopefully pulls out a few more subtleties, especially given that some of the different dike suites are very, very strongly mineralized with bornite and chalcopyrite. So, if we have it at a finer scale, it's not unthinkable to think that maybe some of that could be pulled out.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as Charlie said, that halo as we get further out, just turn the chalcopyrite off and see where that pyrite is very nice and chargeable. So it really does light up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, the pyrite as we get further into intrusive stock is just it's rare. It's not completely absent, but it's a lot rarer than where we see it further out. And it's
Yeah,
almost
I think that's a really good thing to point out. Is the other thing too is like when you actually end up getting into the mining and then later the metallurgy side of it is around, how clean is my concentrate going to be and how difficult is it going to be to process these rocks? And the fact that you're seeing this pyrite just fall out to the outside and you're not seeing much of it on the inside, that means it's going to be very low pyrite or sorry, I should say low pyrite processing requirements prior to creating a con. So yeah,
yeah,
it bodes well for the metallurgy here early days, in my opinion. I've been
yeah,
reading up a bit
especially
on Morrison and some of the stuff on Bell and Grand Isle there, and yeah, it looked like they had a bit more of a challenge with the pyrite in some cases, like with the gold being associated with it more. But I mean, what we're seeing here with those levels of the gold data on the outside, I mean, yeah,
yeah, our gold really doesn't seem to be associated with the presence of pyrite.
yeah,
The other thing that this can pop up is showing where the molybdenite is. So
oh
we
yeah,
have that
yeah,
lining up in red. There's way less of a trend in the moly, which is, I mean, there's a bit more of a higher concentration of it in the
hmm
in the south zone, but we see moly. If we turn off all the other sulfide species,
yeah. I was gonna say
um,
because you could typically use moly as like a vectoring to itself, right? Use it as it forms up as a halo.
yeah, there's a little bit less moly in the north for sure in
Hmm
veins. Um, but we see it down deep in the zone. We see it down high up in the zone. We see it in the chalcopyrite zone. In the south, we see it in the chalcocite and bornite zone. So it doesn't have that. It doesn't have the same zonation, I should say, as
Right.
the copper sulfide species. But there is definitely a higher abundance of it, or at least a higher vein density of it in the south, and
And of course,
certainly
as well as
near
surface.
surface in whole nine. Yeah.
So that's been one of the reason that might happen is been on my mind, and I've been kicking around this idea that it might be as a result of the multiple intrusives that we have maybe on the property. Is that possibly an explanation of why it's showing up a little differently than how we would see or expect with regards to zonation?
Moly in this system is very frequently fracture hosted,
Hmm
or it's coming in later quartz veins in a liming quartz chalcopyrite vein. So it looks like it comes in later. We don't see a lot of disseminated moly or replacement moly similar in the conglomerate, similar to how we see the bornite and the chalcopyrite mineralized within those lithologies.
Right.
The moly is almost always coming in cutting that mineralization. So later.
Right.
So yeah, you're probably on the right track there. It's very similar in timing because we did rhenium osmium dating on some of the coarser molybdenite, and it came back as a very similar age to the intrusives, kind of around between 51 and 52 million years. Uh, but just the cross-cutting relationships, the fact that we have, fractures within otherwise disseminated sulfide rock that host molybdenite, uh, and veins that cut other veins that host molybdenite. We know the moly's coming in a little bit.
Right. That's great.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. What about some of the we were talking. You were talking about the osmium dating, and there was several other suites that you were undertaking here over the winter. Can you touch on how, or if any of that can be incorporated into the modeling as well? There was, what
So
else was? Sorry.
from last season, actually, we got the results back this fall.
Hmm
It takes quite a while to do some of the, especially some of the zircon dating.
hmm
Zircon dating of a couple different samples of intrusive, the granodiorite stock and some of the more distal, darker dikes, all came back at that same sort of late 51 to 52 million years old. So
Right.
they all come back as that Eocene age, Babian Porphyry sweet age. Uh, we are getting some detrital zircons back, hopefully fairly soon. So some detrital zircons from the sandstone and the conglomerates,
Mhm.
and hopefully that will help us give a constraint of our host rock age, and that can be important when you're interpreting, maybe some why we're seeing the style of mineralization we're seeing. Some of the dike contacts with some of the bounding rocks are pretty diffuse, and they're not necessarily sharp contacts. So there's some question as to the age of the actual host rocks.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that could help us that can help us place it in a broader regional geological context.
Right. Yeah. So that may be something that you'd more likely incorporate into, like, you were saying, eventually getting the litho data in here as well. So you could touch
Yeah,
on some of the aging on it. What about, so when the litho data does get in there, are you going to be able to identify and even maybe model out the dikes that we are seeing so that you can see the multiple diking and the differentiation?
as we get more drilling density, absolutely. Right
Mhm.
now,
Yeah.
there's still quite a bit of space between all these holes. Like each one of these squares is 200 meters by 200 meters.
Hmm.
So it's still quite difficult to pull out continuous dikes throughout this distance of rock, especially given how narrow some of the intercepts are.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but as we get more drilling density, that's going to come into focus a lot clearer, and we have a lot more confidence in interpolating between some of these distances.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about the what we know we're talking about doing here for the game plan for drilling coming up. And if you were to hover over where hole 11, right? Is this idea that you'll be walking a fence from south to north. I think that'll do, like, is like when you look there, there's a lot of country there that hasn't even been drilled into yet, right? So.
There is a lot of space in between here, and that's
Hmm.
something
Hmm.
this also highlights quite well, is
Yeah, it
just
jumps out at you.
how much room there is in there to expand. Um, Especially
Yeah.
throw it a zone that we can see is getting maybe a little bit closer to the hotter part of the system. So there's a ton of ground in here that is highly prospective, is in between very strongly known, very strongly mineralized zones, and
Hmm.
it really just shows, yeah, how much untested ground there is, and then also, extrapolating out to the northeast and southwest as well. We've got a really nice near surface zone of grade. Let's turn some of those equivalents on there. Near surface in the south, there's there's quite a bit of room to expand to the southeast and northeast, and in between the south and the north zone, right? And that's just to start. There's a very big property with a very big geophysical expression that all
Yeah,
needs.
yeah. That's why I keep trying to, let's talk about getting that geophysical in here so we can see it line up, so that people can then say, "Wow, this is impressive. Can't wait to fill in that middle." But then, as you're touching on, it's like, well, if this does start to arc to the northeast as well as start to stretch around to the southeast, this suddenly, jumps out at you how much bigger it could get very quickly, right? So, I mean, it's all
Yeah,
very
I'd
early days, but it's very
ah, I'd,
promising given the correlation right now, right?
I'd hesitate to put something like that out for presentation, just given the preliminary stage
Very
of the
preliminary. This
IP
is
data.
all, yeah, this is all conjecture on
But
my part, but
but you're
yeah.
right, it does show. I mean, that would be quite an impressive display when you see just how, especially in 3 dimensions, just really just how off to one corner of this potential system we are. So
Yeah, I mean, it's not to say it's without precedence though. Like, there was one of my tweets I put out earlier with regards to, a comparative with another porphyry stock that was it was all post faulting, right? So it was all intact, and it ended up being drilled out such that they could demonstrate that mineralization was surrounding the entire porphyry stock, right? So it's like, well,
mhm.
it's in the realm. There's a non-zero potential, and it's in the realm of possibility. And there's a lot of promise so far showing at this project. Hence why I've been very excited about it. And yeah, no, I think as this fully matures, I think people will start to see beyond just the box. Like, that's what we're focused on this year, and I think it's going to be we're probably gonna have a great year. But as well as some of the preliminary drilling that we start to do to chase this thing to the edges, right? Let's find the edge. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
Mm.
let's well, we just it needs to be properly tested. This
Absolutely.
is just still, this is still in the grand scheme of things early days here, and there's a ton of ground to still explore, and we've got a lot of really good indication that that ground can be hosting copper porphyry mineralization. So let's yeah, we'll leave it at that for now, and going forwards, yeah, expect to see a preliminary hole plan presented in this format where
Oh
people can
yeah.
see
Okay.
where
Yeah.
the traces of planned holes and how they line up with what we've drilled, and how it can infill and expand things.
Yeah, I mean that's a really great uh, highlight too, because then you're being very transparent about what you're targeting, right? It's like, oh, this isn't a director special hole. This isn't some sort of scissor for just highlighting some sort of grade set. It's like, no, this is the build out that is going to demonstrate the tonnage of what this is going to become as a potential mine in the future for evaluation. And I mean, a lot of the early work I did too on Twitter was trying to highlight where we're seeing these zones and how I was trying to demonstrate, like, look, if we're going to hit something high, I expect it to be in this area. I think this takes it to the next level and then some. I mean, it's going to be very impressive. And you're going to probably get a lot of feedback from people too, like, oh, you should go target over here because look, it's like, well, hang on, we got only so many callers and such a
Well,
budget,
yeah,
but
and
yeah,
it's like opening the kitchen up to how many cooks. I don't know.
yeah, yeah.
But no, we've got a pretty solid plan going forward here. Uh,
Mhm. Yeah.
a
Oh,
lot of the
is that going to? Sorry, it's the moment there too. So there's talks about revealing the upcoming plan post IP study, and that's happening in a couple days, isn't it? A week and a bit, 2 weeks.
yeah,
How are we looking?
planned crew mob right now for the IP is April 15th, plus or
Yeah.
minus
Okay.
a few days here and there, just given how, remote bush work can go. But that's the plan right now.
Right. Yeah. So we could see, the initial, we'll say, tracing or drill tracing of your intended hole targets this year by, early May kind of thing. Hey.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that'd be
kind of the
great.
timeline we're looking at. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Look forward to
excited
it.
yeah, the season's gonna be upon us faster than we realize here. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
good.
Great. Well, hey, thanks for taking the time to present this and share it. I look forward to referencing it here coming up and discussing with anybody who wants to talk about it. I mean, this is pretty impressive. I'm trying to think of any other project operator right now who's presented anything like this. I can't, nothing really comes to mind. I mean, initially when I saw it right off the bat here, cold eyes, I was like, oh, this looks like, Core Shack 3D. But this is a bit more, in my opinion. It's taken that one even to a little bit more of a, we'll
It's
say,
a
advanced level.
Yeah, it's well, and just how smooth it operates and how easy it is to show the data is what I really like about it.
Yeah, I
It's
want to see if I can fire it up on my phone even here, see what it can take.
Yeah, the phone controls are a little clumsy, but if you don't
Mhm.
try to zoom in, you can get a pretty good overall picture of it,
Right.
which is pretty great for having it, not be in a native application. This is just straight up running on HTML on a web browser. So it's some pretty impressive wizardry on the part of Nick there, and
I
yeah,
was going to say, I
we're
expect some other projects probably to adopt it. It's a
super
very
fortunate
lightweight.
to have him on the team. So yeah,
Well, great.
can't say that
Okay,
enough.
well,
So,
let's sign off here for now, and if I come back with you for anything later, I look forward to having you give
yeah,
some updates on this.
yeah, and we'll keep feeding you stuff like this as we create it. So yeah, you'll have
Yeah,
some stuff to look forward to.
great. Thanks, Neil.
Right on. Yeah, thanks, Nate.